They think they can just walk over us. Drevon Mirak's voice cut through the silence of the command center, his tone cold, controlled. He stood before the holographic display, staring into the vastness of space, where the Apex Hunter fleet loomed, their massive ships dark and foreboding against the backdrop of distant stars. This won't be over quickly. A low murmur rippled through the room as the crew exchanged nervous glances, the first signs of uncertainty creeping into their faces. But Drevon didn't allow them to linger on fear. His gaze never wavered from the glowing blue screen, where the Apex Hunter's ships were outlined in precise, clinical patterns. "Prepare for impact," he said, his voice a steel-lined command. "But don't underestimate them. This is only the beginning." The crew snapped into action. They knew the drill, had prepared for this moment for years. The enemy was arriving. The Apex Hunters, the apex of the galaxy's power, a coalition of the most technologically advanced species known. For them, humanity was just another primitive species to be crushed beneath their heel. They had no concept of what humanity was truly capable of. Across the room, Zethor Tal Khan, the Apex Hunter leader, appeared in a holographic transmission. His towering form, encased in exoskeletal armor, radiated confidence. His 6 glowing eyes locked onto Drevon's image. The transmission was clear, brutal. "You should surrender now, human." Talcon's voice boomed through the comms, his tone dripping with disdain. "Your fleet is no match for us. This invasion will be swift, and your species will be erased from existence, as so many before you have been." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of Drevon's lips. He stood taller, hands gripping the rail before him, with a quiet, determined force. "I've heard that before," Drevon muttered under his breath, not breaking eye contact with the alien leader. The room grew tense with the weight of the words, but his tone was resolute. "Let them come. We'll show them what we're made of." There was a beat of silence before Drevon's next words sliced through the air with icy precision. "They're not ready for us." The Apex Hunters, long accustomed to dominating every species they encountered, had never faced anything quite like humanity. They had underestimated the resilience of a species that had survived millennia of conflict, war, and hardship. For humanity, survival was not just instinct, it was an art. Drevon's mind raced with strategies, each more daring than the last. He could hear the hum of the ship's engines beneath his boots as he stared at the holographic projections of the approaching warships. To any other species, these behemoths would inspire terror. But Drevon had fought too many battles, lost too much to be afraid now. "They'll try to break us," Drevon said, speaking more to himself than anyone else. "But they'll fail." His team, a mix of hardened soldiers and civilian engineers, moved with purpose around him, preparing the ship for what was to come. Every man and woman in this room had a purpose now. Humanity's very survival depended on their unity, their resolve, and their ability to adapt in the face of an unstoppable force. The holographic display shifted, showing the first wave of enemy ships, a monstrous armada stretching across space like a black cloud on the horizon. Each ship was armed to the teeth, bristling with weaponry capable of reducing entire cities to rubble. But Drevon didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to his crew. "We don't fight them on their terms," he said, his voice ringing with the authority of someone who had seen war too many times. "We make them fight on ours." The crew nodded, ready for what would come next. This was humanity's moment, the moment when they would either be crushed under the weight of an alien empire or rise to prove their worth in the stars. As the countdown began, Drevon's mind sharpened. Every possibility was laid out before him, but there was one thing he knew for certain. This fight was about more than just survival. It was about proving that humanity would never kneel to any force, no matter how powerful. With a final glance at the Apex fleet, Drevon gave the command. "Ready the decoys." The Apex Hunters had thought humanity was weak. They had believed their technology would obliterate the human race without hesitation. What they didn't understand was that the true strength of humanity lay not in their weapons or technology, but in their unpredictability, in their ability to adapt, to survive, and to turn every challenge into a chance to prove their resilience. But the Apex Hunters wouldn't learn that lesson just yet. Drevon Mirak watched as the first explosion erupted in the distance, a controlled blast that created a perfect decoy. The Apex fleet surged forward, drawn in by the ruse. And as they did, humanity's real strategy began to unfold. A strategy rooted not in overwhelming firepower, but in the clever use of their surroundings, their intelligence, and their sheer unwillingness to be outclassed. The first trap had been set. We're not running anymore. Drevin Marak's voice cut through the crackling communication lines sharp as a blade. His eyes were locked onto the heads-up display where Apex Hunter ships, massive, calculating, swept across the atmosphere of Proxima b. Their engines hummed with devastating power, but to Dravon, they were nothing more than targets. The human forces had been driven to desperation, but desperation had always been humanity's strongest suit. They had no other option but to fight. It wasn't about overwhelming firepower, it was about ingenuity. The Apex Hunters believed they were unmatched, but humanity had learned long ago to survive against forces far greater than themselves. "I need the drones on station," Dravon ordered, voice low but insistent, eyes narrowing on the incoming fleet. "Get the decoy systems in place and start the jamming sequence. Let's see how long it takes before they realize their systems are being hacked." At his side, a technician worked feverishly, his fingers dancing over the console. "Activating the decoy drones now, Captain." A brief flash of green lit the display. "The signal's been scrambled. They're looking for us, but they can't see where we are." "Good." Dravon's gaze shifted to the approaching ships. "Let's show them what happens when you underestimate us." Humanity's first confrontation with the Apex Hunters was not a direct assault. It was a test of endurance, a game of cat and mouse. In the dense jungle beneath the towering trees and thick foliage, the humans hid, adapted, and waited. Their enemy, towering and intimidating, had no idea what was coming. In the heart of the jungle, the first wave of Apex Hunter ground forces had landed. Their boots crushed the underbrush as they marched, alien weapons glinting in the filtered sunlight. They had advanced without caution, an arrogance that cost them dearly. The ground shook with the weight of their steps, but Draven's team moved in complete silence. Hidden beneath the shadows, human soldiers, civilian engineers turned warriors, prepared their traps. Makeshift devices were set in place, wired to detonate or disorient at the right moment. There was no artillery support, no backup. There was only the forest, the tools in their hands, and the ingenuity to turn the odds in their favor. "Ready, Drevin?" The voice crackled through the comms coming from one of his top engineers, Gavin Keldron, stationed on the eastern ridge. "The drones are set, and I've got visual on their transport units. As soon as they pass the triggers, we'll take them down." Drevon adjusted his helmet, sealing it with a sharp click before responding. "Perfect. Stay low, don't get caught." A beat of silence passed, thick with tension. Then a soft voice came through. "I can feel the ground moving beneath them. They're close." The first Apex Hunter soldiers, their massive forms breaking through the brush, had no idea what awaited them. A series of small, seemingly harmless drones, constructed from scavenged materials, repurposed tech from their own destroyed warships, began their work. They darted from tree to tree, silently bypassing the enemy's sensors, placing small explosives and hacking their enemy's comm systems. The first explosion was small but precise. A decoy detonation triggered, sending a plume of smoke and dust into the air. The Apex Hunters froze, their sensory systems going haywire, but they quickly regrouped, scanning the area with heightened vigilance. "It's just a decoy," one of the Apex soldiers muttered in their guttural tongue. Their commander, Zethor Talcan's second-in-command, barked orders to resume their search, but Draven's team wasn't finished. "They've taken the bait," Dravon said softly. His fingers flexed around the control pad as he watched the Apex forces shift their focus. The battle had begun. The real blow came from a seemingly insignificant piece of technology, human ingenuity at its finest. A repurposed Earth mining drone crashed into the Apex's automated communications array, setting off a chain reaction. Their systems scrambled, throwing their lines of communication into disarray. This was no accident. Humanity's use of their own technology against them had worked perfectly. Another series of explosions erupted in quick succession, cutting through the air like a crack of lightning. Apex soldiers scattered, confusion spreading like wildfire through their ranks. The sound of their boots skittering over the uneven ground echoed through the trees. but it wasn't enough to escape the human forces lying in wait. They didn't see it coming. Gavin's voice came through the comms, a flicker of grim satisfaction in his tone. They're down, but not all of them. Be ready for a counterstrike. We knew they'd adapt, Draven responded, his voice calm but with an edge of anticipation. But we have them off balance now. The Apex Hunters command center on their flagship, Vornok, was already in chaos. Their systems had been breached, and their technicians were scrambling to restore power and order. But every second they wasted was another second of lost ground for them. The Apex Hunters had been caught off guard by the humans' adaptability, their ability to take something simple, Earth technology, and bend it into a weapon. This isn't possible, one of the Apex leaders, Ralek, growled through the intercom, as the first wave of Apex soldiers was overwhelmed by the small but lethal traps and disorienting devices humans had set. How are they doing this? A deep voice, Zethor Talcons, rumbled from the speaker. Send in reinforcements, recalculate their strategy, use everything we've got. Meanwhile, in the jungle, Dreven's team tightened their perimeter. The first wave was falling apart, but they knew the Apex Hunters would strike back harder. The early victory wasn't enough to guarantee success. It was just a momentary advantage, and Dreven wasn't about to get cocky. Keep moving, stay in formation, and don't get careless. His orders were short, precise. There was no room for error. But as they prepared for the next phase, a ripple of dark humor passed through the ranks. One of the engineers, a former scientist who had turned to combat in the wake of humanity's invasion, laughed quietly. They call us primitive. They've seen nothing yet. Dreven didn't respond, but a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The humor was fleeting, but it was enough to shift the mood, from survival to dominance. Humanity had struck first, and now with each move, they were rewriting the rules of war. The Apex Hunters were in disarray, and they knew it. Their technological superiority was being crippled by something they had never considered: human resourcefulness. Their prideful, rigid approach to war was no match for the fluidity of humanity's strategy. Draven Merak had led his people into the fray with one goal in mind: survival. But as he watched their first major victory, a small but significant realization washed over him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Humanity was about to make its mark on the galaxy. This is just the beginning, Dreven muttered to himself. He didn't need to say more. His team understood. The Apex Hunters had only seen the first part of humanity's strategy, and now they were playing catch-up. They're here. Dreven's voice was barely a whisper, but the tension in the room was as thick as the air before a storm. The Apex Hunters had mobilized. Their fleet, larger, stronger, and more heavily armed than before, was now in full force, closing in on Earth's remaining defenses. Every sensor on the Vanguard lit up, casting an eerie glow across Dreven's hardened face. The Apex Hunters were no longer playing games. Brace for impact, Draven muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. A low rumble vibrated through the deck of the ship as the first wave of alien missiles slammed into the outer defenses. The ship groaned under the weight of the attack, but Draven didn't flinch. He'd been in worse. The only difference now was that humanity had started to fight back. Deploy the decoys, he ordered, his voice crisp, slicing through the growing chaos. The decoy drones, small but efficient, sped toward the Apex fleet. Their mission simple: draw attention away from the human ships and lead the invaders into a trap. The laser plasma displays in the war room flickered, showing the Apex fleet's movements in real time. Every ship in their armada was a titan of destruction, gleaming with alien weaponry. But Dreven had seen this before. All power, no creativity. All strength, no flexibility. The Apex Hunters had no idea what was coming. They're coming in hot, Gavin Keldron, Dreven's second-in-command, called out from the tactical station. His fingers flew over the display, shifting formations, rerouting energy reserves to shields. We've got the tech advantage for now, but this is about to get messy. It's supposed to get messy, Draven replied, his voice steady despite the looming chaos. Messy means they don't have control anymore. Let's make sure they understand that. Dreven's team worked seamlessly, their movements synchronized with the calm precision of people who had trained for this moment. In the blink of an eye, the first layer of the Apex fleet was in their sights. The humans' diversion had worked, drawing the enemy into a false sense of security. But the Apex hunters were about to get a lesson in underestimating human ingenuity. Outside the Vanguard, the first Apex ship fell victim to humanity's tactics. A massive Apex warship, one of the largest in their fleet, attempted to cut through the decoy line. But as it entered the trap, the ship's systems suddenly began to glitch, its weapons locking in place, its communications scrambling. The crew inside the vessel struggled, unable to understand what was happening. "What the hell's going on?" shouted an Apex engineer, his voice laced with panic. "It's them!" Another officer hissed, eyes widening. "The humans! They've hacked into our systems!" The Apex warship began to tremble. The first wave of human interference had done its job. In a flash, a group of rebel engineers, working from within the Vanguard's control room, had siphoned access to the Apex fleet's data. They were dismantling it from the inside. "Did we just—" Gavin trailed off, glancing at Draven, who was watching the chaos unfold on the heads-up display. The battle was going better than they could have imagined. "We did." Draven's voice was calm, but a spark of grim satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "The first one's down." The Apex Hunters' command structure fell into disarray. On their flagship, Zethor Talcon, the leader of the Apex Hunters, watched in disbelief as his flagship systems were sabotaged. The same fleet that had decimated civilizations for millennia was now a victim of a species they had long considered beneath them. "Report!" Talcon's voice thundered, his compound eyes darting across the chaos unfolding on his control screen. "Sir, there's a breach in our communications and targeting systems." The chief technician's voice cracked with fear. "Our weapons are offline. The humans have hacked into the entire system." A tense silence settled in the control room as the Apex Hunters scrambled to regain control. They had assumed they would crush humanity's defenses in moments. But this new form of attack, this human ingenuity, was unlike anything they had prepared for. In the jungle below, Drevon's team was far from idle. Now that the Apex warship was disabled, they moved quickly, positioning themselves for the next phase of the operation. The human resistance, now empowered by the victory, was no longer just surviving. They were playing offense, using every advantage they had. Improvised weapons, hacked systems, and cunning strategies. "We've got to keep pushing," Drevon said, speaking into the comms. His tone was sharp, confident. "They're going to adapt, but we don't stop. We make them react. We make them second guess. We don't give them an inch." The sound of his voice over the comms was almost a calming force amidst the chaos. His team responded with synchronized movements, each soldier, each engineer, knowing their role. The Apex Hunters might have the numbers, but humanity had the will. "They're regrouping," Gavin said from his station, his voice tight with urgency. "They're getting wise to our game. Their next attack will be bigger." Draven stood silently for a moment, calculating the risks. His eyes flickered over the laser plasma display again, scanning the movements of the enemy ships. The Apex were adjusting, bringing in reinforcements, but they didn't have the element of surprise anymore. Humanity had forced them to react. "Good," Drevon replied, his lips curling into a thin smile. "Let them." The battle escalated in the sky above Proxima B. The Apex fleet, disoriented and reeling from their first major loss, was forced to reorganize. Their sleek, imposing ships were no longer the uncontested force they once were. The humans had shaken the very foundation of their strategy, and now the Apex Hunters were scrambling to keep their fleet intact. Inside the Vanguard, Drevon's voice rang out once more. "Initiate Phase 2. Let's see how they handle this next step." In the distance, another explosion rang out. A second Apex ship had fallen, this one destroyed by another human trap, a carefully placed sabotage that used the environment against them. The Apex Hunters' disbelief was almost palpable, the weight of their overconfidence crumbling. "Impossible!" one of the Apex commanders spat, watching the destruction unfold on his display. "How are they doing this?" "It's just human nature." Drevon's voice came through over the comms, calm and cold. "We've always adapted. Now you see the price of underestimating us." The Apex Hunters were now on the defensive, their technological advantage slipping through their fingers. They had expected an easy conquest, a swift victory. What they hadn't counted on was human ingenuity, the ability to turn their own strengths into weaknesses. It wasn't just about brute force anymore. The war had become a battle of minds, and humanity had learned the art of war long ago. The battle raged on, but the apex hunters were no longer the ones in control. "We're in." Dreven's voice, low and intense, crackled through the comms, his fingers moving deftly over the controls as he bypassed the final layer of apex hunter encryption. His eyes narrowed, scanning the data that was rapidly flooding his screen. In the cold, quiet control room of the Vanguard, the rest of his team worked in synchrony, their faces lit by the glow of the laser plasma displays. The air was thick with anticipation. They had fought long and hard for this moment. The Apex Hunters communications network, their most prized asset, was finally within their reach. "The mainframe's exposed," Dreven continued, his voice unwavering. "Let's make it count." The screens flickered as the team engaged in their silent, covert operation. Every click, every tap on the control panel echoed in the room as the human team planted their digital charges within the Apex's core systems. Once these were activated, they disrupt not only the communication channels but their command hierarchy itself. Outside, the Apex Hunter fleet still held the skies, but now their communication lines were vulnerable. Their arrogance was no longer their strongest suit. It was a weakness humanity could exploit. Dreven's lips curled into a subtle grin. They had underestimated the human ability to adapt, and this was just the beginning. "Dreven, I've got the access code." A voice cut through the tension from Torvath Jek, the Vanguard's head engineer. "Initiating sabotage now." Dreven nodded, already anticipating the next move. Torvath, once a civilian, now a key player in this war, had developed an unerring instinct for strategy in the chaos of battle. He was the one who had found the way into the Apex's most secure channels, an ancient backdoor buried deep within their systems. Dreven tapped a few keys, sending the signal. The next few moments felt like hours as the hacking sequence surged to life. The Apex fleet's communication began to fray at the edges. Static flared across their displays. Their voice transmissions became a garbled mess. "That's it!" Gavin Keldron's voice rang out across the comms, a sharp edge to it. "They don't even know what hit them." Across the Apex Hunter fleet, confusion spread like wildfire. A senior officer on the Vornok, Talcon's flagship, barked orders to his crew, trying to regain control of the failing systems. But Dreven's team had already taken full advantage of the moment. The enemy's once unshakable pride was now their undoing. "How are they doing this?" the commander of the flagship demanded, frustration mounting. His hands slapped against the console, as if trying to force the communication systems back into order. The Apex Hunters, used to dictating every move, found themselves at a loss. They couldn't understand how their impenetrable infrastructure had been turned against them so swiftly. Their technology, designed to annihilate civilizations, had become the very tool of their downfall. "They've hacked into our central command," one of the officers whispered, panic creeping into his voice. "The fleet's in disarray. We can't re-establish communication with the rear squads." In the middle of the chaos, Talcon's deep voice thundered through the bridge of the Vornok. "I want them found, now." His pride was a broken shard in the growing storm of confusion. Back in the jungle, Dreven's strike team moved with precision, infiltrating an Apex Hunter stronghold. Their objective was clear: sabotage the supply lines, cripple the Apex Hunters' communication systems, and leave them scrambling to catch up. Every step had been calculated. The Apex would never see them coming. "On my mark." Dreven's voice was low but carried the weight of years of combat. Every word was measured, every decision a battle won before it even started. He crouched behind a steel beam, eyes scanning the darkened compound. His team was in place, waiting. "Mark." In a flurry of calculated motion, they descended upon the stronghold. Dreven's team was a well-oiled machine. Blending in with the environment, they used Earth technology to disable the Apex defenses from within. EMP devices and disruptors were placed with surgical precision, cutting off the Apex's key infrastructure. The Apex Hunters were no longer in control of the battle. The Apex stronghold erupted in chaos as the power grids failed. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and the once imposing walls of the facility began to tremble as the human sabotage took effect. The apex hunters had built their stronghold to withstand attacks, but humanity had learned to fight on their terms. And now the apex hunters were learning that even the most advanced systems could be torn apart by sheer will and clever tactics. Dreven's heart raced, but his expression remained calm as he led the charge through the crumbling compound. He could feel the weight of his personal vendetta against the apex creeping into his actions. But there was something more, something deeper, driving him forward. This was more than just about revenge. This was about showing the apex hunters that humanity was not a species to be crushed. "They're here!" The voice was sharp, full of urgency. One of the apex officers had finally realized they had been compromised. He reached for the panic button, but it was too late. The sabotage had already been set in motion. Humanity had once again turned the tables. Another explosion rocked the facility as Draven and his team set the final charge. The sound of collapsing walls and disintegrating metal filled the air, but the apex had no time to react. Their arrogance had blinded them. They never expected a species to rise so fast, to outthink them in ways they had never imagined. The team moved swiftly, disengaging from the collapsing facility and heading toward the extraction point. Dreven's heart thudded against his chest, but his mind was already turning to the next steps. They had won this skirmish, but the war was far from over. "I hope they're watching," Dreven muttered to himself, his eyes scanning the horizon where the apex fleet hovered ominously, unaware of the storm brewing beneath their feet. Back in the command center, Dreven watched the results of their mission unfold on the heads-up display. The apex hunters were still reeling. Their communication grid was compromised, their defenses crippled, and the supply lines they'd relied on were gone. And in the distance, he could see the apex warships moving erratically, disoriented, unable to coordinate. The first major loss for the apex hunters had been delivered by the very species they had dismissed. Dreven's fingers tightened around the control panel. The apex had no idea what they were up against. "They're crumbling," Dreven Mirak said, his voice steady, almost a whisper as he surveyed the battlefield unfolding on the laser plasma display. The apex hunters, once so certain of their superiority, now struggled to maintain control. Their fleet was fragmented, unable to coordinate, their pride exposed as their own tactics were turned back on them. The last of the human fighters surged forward, the air charged with anticipation. Their movements were chaotic, unpredictable, but to the apex it was nothing short of utter madness. To humanity, it was a masterstroke. "Prepare to initiate Phase 3, Draven said to his team. His fingers danced over the console, calibrating the final series of attacks that would push the apex hunters over the edge. The laser plasma screens displayed the apex fleet's movements. Ships once designed to dominate were now on the defensive. The humans had pulled off their first wave of disruption, a full-scale hacking operation that had crippled the apex weaponry in their internal communications. Now humanity had gone from mere survival to active engagement. Every trap, every decoy, every calculated maneuver had succeeded. The apex hunters were backpedaling, and they couldn't grasp why. "Sir, reinforcements are inbound." Gavin Keldron's voice cut through the tension. A fresh batch of apex warships had broken through the line, advancing rapidly toward the main human fleet. But Draven wasn't worried. His plan was already in motion. "Let them come," Draven murmured, staring at the display as the apex ships closed in. "We're ready." On the Vornok, Talcon seethed. The once proud apex leader paced the bridge, his massive armored form a picture of controlled fury. Around him, his officers scrambled, trying and failing to regain command of the fleet. "What's happening?" Talcon bellowed at his chief officer. The once immense pride that defined the apex hunters was beginning to dissolve into a mixture of disbelief and fury. "How are they doing this?" The officer at his side glanced nervously at the display. "They're guerrilla tactics. They've completely overrun our defenses, sir. We've lost control of multiple sectors. Their weapon systems have disabled our shields." Talcon's eyes narrowed. Humanity had done what no one in the galaxy had thought possible. They had taken their superior technology and turned it into their downfall. In the field, Dreven's voice came through the comms again, sharp and purposeful. "Phase 3's a go. You know your assignments. Let's turn the heat up. The Apex think they can overwhelm us, but we'll make them see that their arrogance is their weakness. Move. Now. In the distance, the first signs of human ingenuity began to take shape. Small sabotage drones scattered across the battlefield, using basic Earth tech like repurposed EMP devices and jammer pods. They darted through the air, diving into key enemy ships, disabling their communication relays and rendering their defensive systems useless. The Apex hunters had no time to adapt to this new form of warfare. They had expected humanity's attacks to come with heavy artillery or coordinated fighter strikes. What they hadn't anticipated was the quiet infiltration of their systems by a species capable of turning the tide with sheer creativity. "I don't understand," one of the Apex officers screamed as the Vornox systems continued to fail under the onslaught of human hacking. "Sir, they've done something we didn't think possible. They've bypassed our tech completely." The officer's voice trembled with frustration. "We cannot keep up with their adaptive methods." Talcon stood still, feeling the weight of the moment. The tide was turning, and with each passing second, the Apex hunters were losing their grip on what was once an unshakable empire. "Get them out of here," Talcon spat, his mandibles clicking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "We're done." Back on Earth, the humans were relentless in their pursuit of victory. With the Apex Hunter command structure crumbling, Drevon pushed forward, leading his team to deliver yet another strike. A major hit to the Apex's primary fleet, where their most advanced command vessels were clustered together. "Now we make them feel it," Drevon said. His eyes flashed with grim determination. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to break the Apex's spirit. Their arrogance had cost them their fleet, their unity, and soon, if things went as planned, their future in the galaxy. He issued the final command. In an instant, human engineers, hidden within the Apex's own communications network, triggered a series of cyber attacks. Apex warships began to malfunction, their systems locking down, the once imposing fleet slowing to a crawl. The Vornox, Talcon's flagship, was also targeted, its once impenetrable hull now compromised. The damage to their communication systems rendered them helpless. The Apex hunters couldn't coordinate their attack, couldn't even effectively defend their ships. "We've crippled them," Gavin said through the comms, his voice laced with awe and disbelief. "Sir, they're falling apart." Drevon's lips curled into a tight smile as he watched the Apex ships, once so proud and fearsome, now in disarray. Their once unshakable dominance had been shattered by the very people they had so casually dismissed. "Let's finish this," Drevon said, his voice low but firm. The next wave of human guerrilla tactics was already in motion. Drevon's team infiltrated the last of the Apex strongholds, planting the final charges that would cripple their fleet once and for all. Every device, every hack, every plan had led to this moment. The Apex hunters' arrogance had blinded them to one crucial truth. Humanity didn't need to be the strongest. They just needed to be smarter. As Drevon watched from the command center, the explosions began. The Apex hunter ships, their pride, their power, their might, disintegrated in a series of spectacular, devastating flashes. The shock waves rippled through the enemy fleet, the sound of their destruction almost deafening. Humanity had just dealt the Apex hunters their first devastating defeat. The war had shifted in their favor, and the Apex knew it. The Apex hunters had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that their superiority would always win the day. But now the humans were rewriting the rules of warfare, and their adaptability had proven to be their greatest weapon. In the midst of the chaos, Drevon's voice rang through the comms, full of quiet satisfaction. "They're not just surviving anymore. We're winning." And for the first time, Drevon Merak knew he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for a new order, one where humanity stood unbroken, ready to lead. The door slid open with a sharp hiss, and Drevon Merak stepped into the dimly lit conference room. His boots made no sound on the polished floor as he approached the long table where representatives of the Apex Hunter Alliance waited. The weight of the situation settled over him like an oppressive fog, but Drevon showed no sign of doubt. This moment was the culmination of everything humanity had fought for. Across the table, a delegation of Apex hunters, each towering, their sleek exoskeletons shimmering in the muted light, watched him intently. The once arrogant species was now reduced to the role of supplicants, their confident expressions replaced with careful calculation. The apex commander, Zethor Talkan, stood at the head of the table, his multifaceted eyes narrowing as Drevin took his seat. "We come in good faith, human." Talkan's voice, once a booming symbol of command, now held a note of strained humility. "Our fleet is broken. Our forces have been scattered. Our pride shattered. We seek only to save what remains." Drevin studied the alien leader for a long moment before speaking, his voice cool and controlled. "A ceasefire, Talkan." He leaned forward, tapping a finger on the edge of the table. "You want peace, but you come to Earth asking for mercy. I find that telling." There was no anger in his tone, only the calm realization that this meeting, this fragile moment of peace, was the last chance for the apex hunters to save face. But the truth lingered beneath the surface. Humanity was no longer on the defensive. Humanity had evolved, adapted, and now they stood as the undisputed force in the galaxy. And it was time to make the apex hunters understand that. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the heads-up display overhead. It cast a pale light over Draven's face as he leaned back, his hands clasped together in front of him. He glanced at the rest of the apex delegation, their bodies still, their gazes never wavering from his. "You've come to the right place, Talkan," Draven said, his voice dropping slightly. "But let's be clear, this isn't about a ceasefire. It's about humanity showing you the reality of your situation." He let the words settle, watching as the alien leaders absorbed his meaning. Talkan stiffened, his mandibles clicking in surprise. "What do you mean?" Draven's eyes flicked to the laser plasma display, where the Apex fleet lay in ruins. Their ships, once the terror of the galaxy, were scattered, their technology rendered useless by human tactics. "You've underestimated us from the beginning. You thought you were the Apex, the rulers of the galaxy, but you didn't count on one thing: humanity's capacity to adapt." The room went still as Draven continued, the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't offering peace. He was offering leadership. The Apex hunters had been forced to confront their own pride, their arrogance laid bare by the very species they had so easily dismissed. One of the Apex leaders, Kalar Nax, a towering figure of crystal-hard plating, spoke up, his voice filled with suspicion. "You say humanity has adapted, but what is it that you offer us? A future where your kind leads us into the unknown? How can we trust you?" Draven allowed a faint smile to curve his lips. The question was predictable, yet essential. He was prepared for it. "We don't need your trust. We need collaboration. The future you're afraid of isn't one where humanity rises at your expense, Talkan. It's a future where we all stand together. The galaxy is a vast place, but it's also fragile. We don't need to fight for dominance. We need to fight for survival." The words hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. As Draven spoke, his mind raced, not with battle plans, but with the gravity of what was at stake. He had seen the Apex hunters' pride crumble in the face of their own failures. Now he would give them a glimpse of the future they could share, or not. A low murmur swept across the Apex delegation, and Talkan's posture stiffened, as if he were struggling to suppress a rising wave of indignation. "You would have us bend the knee," he growled, his voice filled with barely contained anger. "To work alongside you as equals? We would never allow our honor to be so tainted." "Honor?" Draven's laugh was short, almost cutting. "You speak of honor, yet you threw it away when you attacked Earth. You thought you could wipe us out like the others you've conquered, but we fought back. And now here we are." He leaned forward, his tone gaining strength. "I'm not here to destroy you, Talkan. I'm here to offer you a choice: evolve or become extinct. The choice is yours." A sharp silence followed, broken only by the quiet hum of the heads-up displays, which continued to monitor the shifting tides of power across the galaxy. The Apex hunters, now on the edge of defeat, were beginning to recognize that their previous assumptions about humanity's place, about their superiority, had been wrong. They had been outsmarted. They had been outlasted. Talcon's mandibles clicked once more, but this time it was not in anger. The alien leader seemed to take in Draven's words, considering them more seriously than before. We see your point. He finally spoke, his voice strained but with a hint of reluctant respect. And what do you propose, human? Draven allowed himself a slight nod. A summit, a place where we can forge the future together. Not as conquerors or subjugates, but as partners. The galaxy doesn't need more bloodshed. It needs unity. His eyes flicked to each of the Apex leaders, ensuring his message landed. Humanity will lead, not through force, but through innovation. We will rebuild this galaxy together, if you're willing to join us. Draven's words were not just a diplomatic strategy. They were the truth. The Apex hunters, once proud and untouchable, had been forced to confront the reality of their situation. The summit would not just be a negotiation, it would be a reckoning. The apex of their civilization had fallen, and now they had to decide whether they would adapt or become irrelevant. The room was thick with silence, the future of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Draven Merak had offered humanity's vision. The Apex Hunters had no choice but to listen. This isn't a defeat, Talcon. It's an awakening. Draven Merak's voice cut through the tension like a knife. The words deliberate, carrying the weight of everything humanity had fought for. The Apex Hunters, once proud and unyielding, now found themselves at a crossroads, staring at a future they could no longer dominate. The summit had taken a turn none of them had expected, and now they had to decide what came next. Across the table, Talcon, the once commanding leader of the Apex Hunter Alliance, remained still, his many eyes betraying the turmoil within. His form was rigid, but the mandibles that had once clicked with smug certainty now lay quiet, suspended in the air, as if reflecting on the shattered facade of his species' superiority. The other Apex leaders around the table mirrored his silence, waiting, uncertain. "You don't understand," Talcon finally spoke, his voice hoarse, drained of the venom it once held. "This wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to bow before us, like the others." Draven's lips curled into a brief smile, not one of triumph, but of hard-earned understanding. "You thought we were just another species to conquer, that our will would bend under the pressure of your might." He let the silence stretch for a moment, the weight of his words settling into the room. "You underestimated humanity's most powerful weapon, its ability to adapt." The other Apex leaders shifted uncomfortably, but Draven did not relent. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering as he addressed the Apex Council. "You see, Talcon, this wasn't just about survival. It was about us choosing to fight for something greater. You've forced us to rise, and now you have the opportunity to rise with us, not against us." Outside the summit room, the galaxy trembled, not from the roar of weapons, but from the silent realization that something fundamental had shifted. Humanity had not only survived, but had become a force that could no longer be ignored. The Apex Hunters, a group whose pride had once held the galaxy in its grip, now found themselves forced to reckon with the very species they had tried to destroy. "I admit," Talcon's voice was quieter now, as he turned his focus to the holographic display in front of him. A detailed map of the galaxy, showing the now fragmented Apex territories. "We've underestimated you. We believed our technology, our might, would crush you. But instead, we've watched you turn our strengths against us." Draven's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression still composed, but his voice cut through the air with force. "It's not about turning your strength against you. It's about taking that strength and creating something new. We don't want to crush you, Talcon. We want you to stand beside us." He gestured toward the rest of the council. "Humanity has endured centuries of war, conflict, and loss. We've learned that in a galaxy this vast, survival doesn't come from destruction. It comes from cooperation." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "The future of this galaxy lies in unity, not in conquest, but in collaboration. That's the message we're offering." The room fell into silence, the atmosphere heavy with the implications of Draven's words. The Apex Hunters had long been a force of destruction, but now they were facing the possibility of something entirely different. An alliance. something that would force them to rethink everything they had ever believed about strength, power, and survival. "What are you asking of us, human?" Kalar Nax, one of Talcon's closest advisors, finally spoke. His voice held a note of cautious curiosity, tinged with the frustration of a species who had lost its place at the top of the food chain. Drevin leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room. His voice was measured, his next words carefully crafted. "I'm asking you to stop seeing us as enemies. We're not your prey, we're your partners. Together we can shape the future of this galaxy. Not through dominance, but through innovation and cooperation. We've survived. Now it's time for us to lead. Together." There was a long, drawn-out pause. A hum of uncertainty filled the room as the apex hunters exchanged looks. Their once imposing confidence had faltered. What they saw in Drevin and humanity was not just defiance. It was something more dangerous, creativity, something they couldn't predict, couldn't control. Finally, Talcon looked up, his expression unreadable. "We came here to stop the war," he said, the weight of his words sinking deep. "And you're offering us an end to the conflict, but not on your terms, on ours. If we are to survive, we must work together. The war ends here, but the future begins now." The room was still, but this time the silence felt different. It was the sound of change, the kind of silence that follows after a storm, when everything has been washed clean. Humanity had not only survived the war, they had shifted the balance of power in the galaxy. Drevin nodded, his voice soft but firm as he addressed the entire Apex Hunter delegation. "I think we've all learned something in this war, Talcon. Humanity has taught us that strength isn't just about power, it's about resilience, about adapting, evolving, and most importantly, learning how to create something better from the wreckage. The galaxy doesn't need more conquest, it needs cooperation." As the summit continued, the conversation began to shift. The Apex Hunters slowly started to acknowledge humanity's potential, not just as survivors, but as equals. The arrogant belief that they were the pinnacle of evolution began to fade, replaced by a grudging respect. Their pride, which had once been an unshakable foundation, now lay in pieces before the table. Humanity's resilience had cracked their defenses, and now they had no choice but to accept the reality of a new era. As the summit drew to a close, Drevon's mind shifted to the future, no longer focused on vengeance, but on what lay ahead. Humanity's victory wasn't in the war, it was in the peace they were about to forge. A peace where strength was defined not by the might of weapons, but by the ingenuity of minds willing to work together for a greater good. "The war ends today," Drevin said to the room, his voice strong, his words carrying the weight of an entire civilization. "And the future begins now." The Apex Hunters fleet rumbled softly as it prepared to leave Earth's orbit, but the usual arrogance in its departure was absent. This time, the ship seemed to linger, reluctant to depart, as if the galaxy they had once thought to dominate had turned from one of absolute power to one of shared responsibility. The laser plasma displays aboard the flagship flickered briefly before the image of Earth's serene surface was replaced by the endless stretch of space, a cold reminder of how far they had fallen. For the first time in millennia, the Apex Hunters were not departing as conquerors. They were leaving as equals. Drevin Mirak stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the most advanced station humanity had built as a symbol of their new role in the galaxy. The faint hum of the engines was the only sound, almost unnoticed in the vast emptiness. The space before him was no longer alien. It was his, humanity's. "They're leaving," Zethor Talcon's voice echoed behind him. The former Apex commander had been assigned to oversee the transition of their species' attitude, but his pride remained cracked. He had been one of the first to acknowledge the shift in the galaxy's balance of power. "I never thought this day would come." Drevon turned slowly, his face a mixture of resolve and quiet pride. "Neither did I, Talcon, but it's here now." He shifted his gaze to the window, where the fleet of once untouchable Apex ships receded into the dark unknown. "Now, we lead." The Apex Hunters had departed, but humanity was just beginning to make its mark on the galaxy. The summit had sparked a new era of cooperation. Drevon Mirak, with his strategic brilliance, An unwavering belief in humanity's potential had led the charge, pushing humanity from survival to leadership. And now, as the leaders of Earth, they would not only shape the future of this new galactic order, but redefine what it meant to thrive in a galaxy filled with uncertainty. A new day dawned on the galactic stage. Earth, once a fragile planet on the fringe of the cosmos, now stood as a beacon of hope. Harmony Station became the center of innovation, where human ingenuity began to spread like wildfire, lighting the way for other civilizations. The apex hunters might have controlled vast swaths of space, but humanity had something more: adaptability. And as the first human-led council meetings began, Dravan realized that this was only the beginning. "This is what it feels like to truly lead," Dravan said quietly, as his eyes scanned the bustling hub of the station. Leaders from different species, many who had once considered humanity a nuisance, were now listening to Earth's proposals for a cooperative future. The apex hunters may have left Earth's orbit, but the implications of their departure would ripple across the galaxy for generations. Humanity has shown us how to survive, and now it will show us how to thrive. The words of Talcon resonated in Dravan's mind as the apex leader addressed the council, now as a partner in this grand venture. The apex hunters, once the mightiest military force, were now part of the galactic conversation, not as subjugators but as allies. The humble nature of this new alignment filled the room with an energy that was palpable. For the first time in history, the most advanced species were joining forces, not as conquerors, but as equal partners. The diplomatic meetings were unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Trade agreements were signed, defense protocols shared, and cultural exchanges planned. But there was one thing more significant than all of these combined: the mutual respect now shared between the once opposing species. The apex hunters, though still proud, recognized something fundamental had changed. They no longer held dominion over the galaxy, but they no longer had to. Later, as the summit continued, Dravan found himself reflecting on the choices humanity had made to get here. It wasn't brute force that won the day, nor was it sheer determination. It was something simpler and more complex than that: adaptability. Humanity, through sheer will and ingenuity, had turned the tables. But victory didn't come in the form of conquest. It came in the form of understanding. The apex hunter's pride had been humbled, but humanity's spirit had been forged in the crucible of adversity and turned into something greater. Varduk Leth, one of the last of the apex warlords, stood near the observation deck, gazing out into the vastness of space. His exoskeleton glinted softly under the station's artificial light, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable. Not as a conqueror, but as an ally. "I never thought we would be standing here, in your shoes." His voice was quiet, thoughtful, and reflective. Dravan nodded but didn't speak at first. The air around them seemed to hum, not with the weight of power, but with something more elusive: the sound of change. "None of us did, but we're here now, and that's what matters." He glanced at the window once more, his gaze unwavering. The future isn't about domination, it's about building something that lasts, together. As humanity began its leadership role, the first signs of galactic cooperation emerged. The apex hunters weren't gone. They had simply accepted their place at the table. The Arcturan Collective, once a distant ally, began to send representatives to Earth, eager to discuss the possibilities of joint ventures in technology and peacekeeping efforts. And the Silicon hegemony, long a rival, found common ground with Earth's newfound influence. With each passing day, the walls of old divisions began to crumble, replaced by the foundation of a new order, one built not on domination, but on collaboration. The galaxy was changing, and humanity, now firmly at the center, was not just a part of that change, they were driving it forward. Dravan Merak stepped away from the summit's final session, his heart heavy with the weight of what had been accomplished. He had led humanity through the fire, and now, standing at the threshold of a new era, he realized that the true challenge wasn't over. It was just beginning. The future wasn't about fighting for survival anymore. It was about shaping a future where all species had a place, a voice, and a stake in what came next. The galaxy has seen our strength, our resilience, our ingenuity. Now it will see our vision. Drevin whispered to himself as he watched the Apex Hunters' ships retreat into the depths of space. Their departure wasn't a loss. It was the first step in a long journey of galactic cooperation, and this time it was humanity leading the way. The night sky outside Harmony Station had never seemed so still, so profound. Humanity's first interstellar outpost, once a dream whispered among scholars and soldiers alike, now stretched beyond the stars, bold and unwavering. The Apex Hunters had long since retreated, their presence no longer a threat, but the galactic horizon was still marked by the scars of conflict. Humanity's war was over, but its future had only just begun. Drevin Mirak stood at the same observation window where he'd watched the ships depart, staring now at the vastness of the stars that seemed to hum with untapped potential. He had led them through the fires of war, through unimaginable loss and grief, but now he was witnessing something even more incredible. Peace. He had been a soldier, a strategist, a leader, but today he was simply a man looking out over the immense stretch of space, filled with more possibility than he had ever imagined. The calm of the station felt unreal compared to the chaos of those early days. No longer would humanity struggle to survive. They were now shaping their own future, the blueprint for an era of cooperation. But the journey hadn't come without its costs. A soft chime rang, pulling Draven's attention away from the window. The heads-up display flickered to life before him, bringing the latest communique from Earth's Council of Leaders. "Sir," the voice of Gavin Keldrin crackled through, "the final agreements with the Apex Hunters have been signed. The last of the galactic delegations are arriving as we speak. The new era is here." Dreven's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "Tell the Council we're ready, but first I need to speak with Talcon." An hour later, in one of the private chambers of Harmony Station, Dreven sat across from Zethor Talcon, the former Apex Hunter leader, now a reluctant ally. Their conversations had come full circle, and the once proud warrior sat now with a quiet respect for the human who had shattered everything he had known. "It's strange," Talcon spoke slowly, his voice softened by years of struggle. "For so long we believed we were the pinnacle. We conquered, we dominated. We thought strength meant the destruction of others. But now," he paused, his many eyes reflecting the weight of the truth, "now I see strength differently. I see it in what you've created, not through war, but through unity." Dreven nodded, his own expression heavy with the same realization. "It's not about the fight anymore, Talcon. We've learned that true strength isn't about forcing others to bend, it's about lifting them up." The air was still in the council chamber, the hum of distant voices and the soft click of data pads, marking the beginning of humanity's new role as intergalactic leaders. The summit was over, but the true test had only just begun. Dreven stood now at the head of the table, surrounded by representatives from nearly every known species. The Apex Hunters, no longer commanders of conquest, now sat with humanity, seeking a future of collaboration, not competition. "For too long, we saw ourselves as the victims of fate," Dreven began, his voice echoing through the chamber, each word clear and steady. "We believed our survival was a fluke, but the truth is, our survival is our greatest gift." He turned, making eye contact with Talcon, who now stood beside him as an equal. "We are not victims. We are creators. And this galaxy, the one you sought to rule, will now be the one we lead. Not with power, not with might, but with a shared vision. A vision where all species can not only survive, but thrive." The room fell into a deep, almost breathless silence. For the first time, the various representatives of the galaxy were no longer fearful of the humans. They were looking to them, to humanity, for answers. The Apex Hunters no longer held the key to the galaxy's fate. That responsibility had been passed on to humanity. "It is time," Dreven continued, his voice a soft rumble that carried with it all the authority of a leader. "Time to forge a new way. The future isn't in our hands alone. It's in the hands of every species willing to move forward. Together." He stepped back from the table, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. Later that evening, as Draven looked out over the endless stretch of space from his quarters, he could feel the quiet shifting of the universe around him. He was no longer the only one looking forward. Others were too. Humanity had taken its place on the galactic stage, not through brute force or coercion, but through the simple act of understanding. The apex hunters, once the rulers of the galaxy, had bowed before humanity's strength in a way they had never expected. The lesson they had learned wasn't one of physical power, but of mental and emotional resilience. Humanity had proven that strength did not always come from war, but from the capacity to adapt, to create, and to find solutions that benefited all. The galaxy has always been ours to shape, Draven whispered to himself, his eyes fixed on the stars beyond. But now we will shape it with others. And so the legacy of humanity began, not through the fire of war, but through the quiet strength of cooperation. The galaxy, once a battleground for survival, would now become the vessel of progress, propelled forward by the very species that had once been thought weak, insignificant, and destined to fall. Humanity had risen, and the universe would never be the same again.